Hi, fourth graders. Mrs. Somick here, and I am presenting our lesson today on understanding scientific texts. So, if you see down here in the bottom corner of my screen, I have my reading notebook out and I have my pen here. Get a pencil handy for you. And let's go ahead and write down today's topic, lesson 4, and you can simply just write scientific text. So, when I say scientific text, what do you think it is that we're going to read about? Well, scientific sounds a lot like the word science, right? And so scientific text is actually one of our vocabulary words we'll take a look at. And so when we talk about scientific text, we're also going to be reviewing over the idea of causes and effects and certain events. And if you look down at our learning target here, the events that we're going to talk about are the events that happen in the natural world. Okay. Well, why would I be reading about the events that are happening in the natural world? Well, thinking carefully about the information in science text is going to help you understand what happens in the natural world and why or how it happens. Okay, so we're really going to be focused on what it is that's occurring and then why or how. And these texts help us understand that. All right, if you have your heading ready to go, let's go ahead and take a look at these vocabulary words. So the first one that we need to write down is scientific text. And we know that's a piece of text that explains how or why something happens. And I have mine already written down here in my notebook. Now, you at this point may need to go ahead and pause. We have 4 words. And what I want you to do is go ahead and copy those 4 words and definitions down, okay, in your reading notebook. When you're ready to move on, go ahead and hit play. All right, let's keep going. Now, let's think about this natural world here around us, and I'm going to show you a photograph to help us review over causes and effects. Now, what's happening in this picture? Well, I see a river, and I see pieces of ice, right? Okay, but is it a solid sheet of ice on this river? No, it looks like it's breaking up, isn't it? Okay, it's broken down into pieces. So if that's what's occurring, why is that happening? Do you have any ideas? All right, let me reveal my answer to you. Maybe this is what you were thinking too. When something is occurring, there's usually a reason for why it's happening. So in this example, the ice is melting. Why? What is the cause? Well, the heat from the sun. Okay. Without this heat, the ice would have remained frozen. But what happens is the effect. What's the effect? The ice is melting. So why is it happening? That's our cause. Because the sun's heat is raising the ice's temperature, and the end result is that it's going to be melting on the river. Okay, so just to review one more time, the cause is the heat from the sun, and what was the effect? What happened to the ice? It began to melt. Okay, so going back to the text we're presenting this week, a good scientific text is kind of like having a science expert right there by your side. That'd be pretty cool. And explaining the causes and effects of everything that's going on around you. All right, they would tell you what's happening during more of like a series of what we call events in nature. Okay, and knowing and understanding those events are going to help you answer some really important questions: how the event happens and why the event is happening. And knowing the answers to these questions is going to simply help you understand the world you live in. All right, I've got a really cool video to share with you that's going to introduce a topic of the scientific text that we are going to explore today. All right, are you ready? Because I sure am.
Like buried treasure, they lie hidden from sight. Echoes of an ancient past, they whisper secrets and tell tales once lost to time. Fossils are remnants or impressions of ancient organisms that are naturally preserved in stone. While there are hundreds of fossil types, they are often grouped into 2 major categories: body fossils, which are the preserved remains of plants and animals, and trace fossils, which are records of an animal's behavior, such as footprints. Together, they form the fossil record, a primary account that tells the story of life on Earth through stone. Fossilization, or the process of preserving organisms in stone, can occur in countless ways. These methods are largely grouped depending on whether the organisms are altered during the fossilization process. Fossilization that does not alter a specimen can help to preserve its original form and texture. Among many methods, this group includes organisms that have been frozen, preserved in tar pits, and mummified. One special case involves trapping organisms, oftentimes insects, in amber. This process begins when an organism is covered in tree sap. The sap, or resin, forms a protective seal around the entrapped organism. Over time, the soft resin hardens and turns into amber, with the organism suspended within. This process creates a biologically inert tomb for the organism, allowing its soft tissues to be remarkably preserved. Other fossilization methods change the specimen as it is being preserved. For instance, carbonization transforms soft tissues into thin black films of carbon. In fact, countless layers of carbonized plant material create a well-known fossil fuel, coal. But one of the most common types of fossilization that changes a specimen is called permineralization. Permineralization begins when minerals from water or the ground enter the pores of dead plant or animal material. Over time, the minerals attach themselves, clinging onto cellular walls and building a crystalline network in the empty cavities. This mineralization hardens the bone and turns it into stone, thereby preserving its original structure and fossil form.
All right, friends. So I hope you enjoyed that video there. It was really fascinating to see about how fossils actually form because that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. So I have kind of a simplified 1, 2, 3 step process here in this cartoon below on how fossils are actually created. How are they formed? Okay, so let's take a look at this cartoon I have, and I want you to think about what events are actually occurring. Now, if you want, you can go ahead and record these events down in your notebook paper because you're going to need to fill them in on the chart that I'm going to show you in your Google Classroom here in just a moment. Okay. Of course, you can always come back to the video if you need to. So let's look at these events because these events are going to help us understand why and how they're happening. Okay. So first, the fish dies and sinks to the bottom, ocean bottom, and it's covered in mud, which may harden. Okay. Next, and of course, if you take a look, this would happen around 2 million years ago. So this is not a fast change. This is a slow process. Slowly, the fish bones dissolve and are replaced by other minerals, and they become a fossil. We saw that even in the video of a common way that fossils are created and how they're formed. Now, they've hardened to become a fossil, but then how do we discover fossils if they're so far under the Earth's surface? Well, the ocean drains away, and that erosion is what uncovers the fossils so that we have discovered them today. So remember that process for me because here's your graphic organizer. You're going to have one just like it on your Google Doc that you're going to need to fill in the events. So I've now learned on how and why a fossil is created. So over millions of years, remember, it's not a quick process. The fish skeleton dissolves and it's replaced by other minerals. They harden in the shape of the skeleton. This creates the fossil. Later, erosion wears away the rock and soil to uncover the fossil. So I'm able to come up with that whole how and why statement. How was I able to do that? By thinking about the events. All right, what was the first event in the cartoon that happened? What does the fish have to do? Remember, the fish has to die and it has to sink to the bottom and then it's covered with mud. Now, after it's covered with mud, what was the next event we talked about? The mud hardens around that fish skeleton. Okay, almost like it's forming that tomb, right? Then, remember the skeleton is going to start to dissolve and those minerals will fill in and it will harden where the skeleton was. And now we know that this has created a fossil, but what was the final event we talked about? How do we find it if it's underneath Earth's surface? Do you remember? Millions of years later, that rock wears away and a person can discover the fossil in the shape of the fish skeleton. So simply going back and thinking about these events, I now know how and why a fossil is actually created. Pretty cool stuff. All right, so even if you don't have someone near you, okay, let's kind of talk this out about what we just learned about today, okay? I definitely would agree with the events and their order, okay, with what we just saw, because the events explain the process on how the fossil actually forms. So if those details are helping me understand more, okay, about the causes and effects of this event, of how the fossils are forming, we could even kind of come up with a statement here. The fish became a fossil because. How did the fish become a fossil? Think of your events. It's covered in mud. And then what happens? The mud hardens and forms kind of like a casing around it. What do the bones do? They dissolve. But as they're dissolving, those minerals come in and fill in the space and harden. And then finally we can discover it through erosion and the rock washing away. And we can find it today. Okay, so I hope that kind of helps you understand that how and why fossils are formed. Now, let's talk about today's assignment here. Okay, I already told you have a Google, in your Google document, you have a chart to fill in. But the other thing, your quick write today, I want you to think about another natural process. Maybe think about how a plant could grow or how rocks change. And I want you to think about the events in that process and try to explain to me why this event happens. This happens by. So I've given you some sentence starters to help you. So pick a natural process. A natural process that occurs in nature is plants growing, right? This happens by, or this happens because. Try to explain to me that process. All right, so let me go ahead and pull up your exit slip here. Just like I said before, please make sure you put in your name, review over your cartoon. Okay, remember we talked about how and why, and your events need to go here. Type the events that lead to the creation of a fossil. All right, you can go back to your cartoon to help you. After you've typed in your events, this is where you're going to type in a couple sentences here, choosing a natural process, and then explain to me how this process happens. This happens by. I want a few sentences here, okay? And I can't wait to see your responses. So just to wrap up and get ready for tomorrow, in the next section, we're going to continue reading scientific texts, and we're going to continue exploring more cause and effects relationships. Why? Because thinking of causes and effects is going to help you better understand the natural process that's being described in the text. All right, friends, I hope you enjoyed our video for today. Fill in your text, your scientific text exit slip, and get those turned into your teacher. Can't wait to see what you come up with. Until next time.